wave of water, they went in two directions. They went out to what is now known as Oceania and became a people known as the Negritos, and they also went towards Mexico and impacted this Olmec civilization. The reason why we now know that is because there was a genetic trace done. You know about DNA now. That's getting a lot of play in the paper. DNA means you can trace the genetic code of a people.
So, let's follow what the data and the studies say on this matter.
The genetic code of the, and there are still native blacks in Mexico. That's never been explained by archaeologists before Columbus arrived. What connects it up is even the word Moor, because it's pronounced differently in different parts of even of Africa.
Mainstream archaeologists have constantly denied these facts, but there is just too much evidence.
We're talking about the genetics of these Native American, but the Olmecs seem to have very similar features, the thick lips, the wide noses. Why do we think that is?
Well, this is part of a curious mystery that is not unconnected to the genetic mystery.
The Mother High culture in Mesoamerica, the one who brought in all the hallmarks of civilization, from writing to mathematics, stone building and religion, that culture shows some very interesting properties. But when historians demonstrate that these cultural features are not alien at all, but clearly displays similarity with its black African counterpart across the Atlantic, these historians are immediately cast aside because of the implication of these statements. And yet, there is a large body of evidence that shows that the Mesoamerican civilization was kick-started by Africans around the year 1500 BC. So much so that despite centuries of denial and cover-up, we can still see the signs in many aspects of the Olmec culture and the cultures that followed it. In 1862, when the first Olmec head was discovered in Tres Zapotes, José Melgari Serrano examined the head and noted the following: that the statue had a large flat nose, full lips, and almond-shaped eyes. The winds of yesterday sing into our sails the name of the ancient ones. The Atlantic Ocean was always thought of as an uncrossable barrier, a 7,500 miles crossing that historians say was only made by the Vikings, all the while disregarding the receipts of numerous waves of African crossing and influence into the New World. I mean, one has to be blind to the fact that the Mesoamerican civilization miracle can only be explained once it is put into the context of an African seeding. Not because the people of the region were not capable, but because the Africans happened to have nurtured those sciences for millennia and had the practice of consistently spreading it to the rest of the world. When Dr. Andrzej Wiercinski studied the remains of Olmec-era Mesoamerica, he was surprised to discover that 13.5% of the skeletons from Tlatilco and 4.5% of the skeletons from Cerro de las Mesas were Africoid. He supports this claim with skeletal evidence from several Olmec sites, where he found skeletons that were analogous to the West African type black. This means that 3,000 years later, we are still able to find skeletal remains that point to a clear and substantial African presence in Olmec country from that era. And this evidence makes sense, because if the Africans came in such numbers, the same Africans that we find in ancient Egypt, as genetic has shown, these Kemetu would have encountered an already existing stock of people living in Mesoamerica. They would have been concentrated in one area, the port of arrival in the Americas, and over the centuries, they would have merged with the existing population.
This figure was quite distinct, and they found in the dry areas of the Olmec world skeletons that could be linked with continental African types, Africoid types. Professor Wiercinski, a Polish skull expert, showed that these were African type skeletons.
I mean, look at the heads of the Olmec kings and compare them to the one in the middle, the head of Taharka, the Egyptian king. How is it even possible to say that these heads are not African, and their features would be seen in the population of the area today? And this is exactly what genetics is showing us.
That the settlement story of the Americas is much more complicated than we've realized.
So the Mesoamericans who have typical African features today don't have them because of similarities with Africans. They have them because the Africans brought these genetic characteristics to the population of the area. But are there any clear signs that black Africans had contact with and influenced Mesoamerican culture in ancient times? Did you know that documented in the journals of Columbus himself, there is clear account of Africans having already made the voyage to the Americas? And it is from these African sailors and traders that Columbus and the Portuguese would learn to build deep seaworthy ships and learn how to navigate to the Americas.
And there he learned from the Portuguese, who were moving across Africa, who had set up the first fort among Europeans in Africa, that African sailors had actually crossed over the Western Ocean and had found a land mass in the south. This was not what Columbus had found. Columbus found islands, which are now known as the Caribbean islands, but he had not gone onto a continental mass. The Africans had found the actual continental mass. And the Portuguese insisted that this continental mass in the south was 370 leagues, which is about 15 to 1600 miles away, according to whether you count the league as 4 or 4.5. They were.
And all over Africa, prior to the arrival of the Europeans, there was a vibrant and diverse shipbuilding industry. And with those ships, they went everywhere, literally everywhere. But this is again not reported in contemporary media and history books.
There is a profound misunderstanding of African capacity. The Africans had ships. This is one of them. This is in East Africa. This ship, this is just a model which I found in Fort Mombasa in Kenya. This ship is a 70-tonner. Ships like these in the 13th century before Columbus took elephants to China. European shipping is not even European. The sail Columbus used comes out of the Arab-African world. The astrolabe comes out of the Arab-African world. They found in the desert before Columbus, in the period before Columbus, the Africans were using compasses and nautical instruments to navigate the desert.
The many elephant motifs in Mesoamerican art present a problem for the current historical narrative, given that elephants were not native to the Americas during the periods when these cultures flourished. This anomaly is immediately solved when, number one comes to know that the West Africans had seaworthy ships. Number two, that their ships were more than capable of transporting very large cargo like elephants and giraffes, as documented by the Chinese. And number three, the documented accounts of West Africans making the voyage well before and during the time of Columbus. They call it a mystery. The sudden emergence of the Olmec civilization in 1600 BC as a fully formed civilization. If that was the case, then we would not be able to link its civilizing elements to existing and older civilizations. The Olmec writing system is often referred to as the Cascajal script because its most notable evidence is found on the Cascajal block, a stone tablet discovered in the Olmec heartland in Veracruz, Mexico. This writing is considered one of the earliest known writing systems in the Americas, dating back to around 900 BCE. It predates all Mesoamerican scripts, such as the Maya glyphs, and is believed to be the root of these later writing systems. The Cascajal script contains 62 unique symbols, arranged in a non-linear fashion. The symbols include abstract shapes, plants, and what appear to be animal forms, which may reflect Olmec religious or cultural themes. Does that remind you of something? Another writing system that is non-directional, which can be written from left to right, from right to left, or from top down. And if you said hieroglyphics, you would be right. The similarities between Mayan and Egyptian hieroglyphs just cannot be attributed to chance. Both use phonograms followed by ideograms to relate meaning. These are pretty much the only languages in history to do so. The odds of that happening independently, randomly, and within the same time period is astronomically impossible. Just for context, other independently developed writing systems in the world look nothing like hieroglyphics. And I am not talking about Chinese kanji, Arabic script, Greek alphabet, or Phoenician alphabet, because these have all been shown to come from Medu Necher, the African hieroglyphics, from Egypt. But other systems like the Proto-Saharan script, the Blombos cave markings, or Ncibiti, their properties are very different from hieroglyphics. But it also extends to their numbers. Olmecs happen to have a base 10 number system, just like the Africans in ancient Egypt. They could have chosen a base 20, like the Yoruba in Nigeria, or the Bassa in Cameroon. Or they could have chosen a base 60 like the Sumerians. Or they could have chosen a base 12. Or another unique way of counting. But they happen to have the same counting methods as the Africans from Kemet. And subsequent Mesoamericans, civilizations, had a base 20 number system, which is just an extension or a doubling of the Olmec and Kemetic base 10, even down to the mortuary masks for their dead kings that they also buried in pyramids, in ornately decorated pyramids. Golden masks for dead Mesoamerican kings, golden masks for the pharaohs. Mummification for the Aztec and the Maya, mummification in Egypt, stone sarcophagus for the Mesoamerican kings, stone sarcophagus for Nubio-Kemetic kings, pyramids in Mesoamerica, pyramids in Egypt, and these pyramids share a lot in terms of their dimensions, their orientation, their style, their building technique. To say that this is a coincidence is to be wholly dishonest, especially in the face of all the other evidence. All of this shows why it is not a miracle that the Olmec civilization just sprang out of nowhere. And it is also not a coincidence that it happened to have emerged on the east coast of the Americas, exactly where the Atlantic currents end. But then, if indeed the first high culture in the Americas was seeded by Africans, surely there must be some remains of them from that period. And this is exactly what we will see in the next section. In the earliest depictions of the feathered serpent god, Quetzalcoatl, we can see a Mesoamerican man being flown by the serpent, and in possession of a very peculiar object. If you look closely, you will see that he is carrying a handbag, and this famous handbag has been seen in almost all significant ancient civilizations outside of the Nubio-Kemetic civilization. Quetzalcoatl was associated with the wind, learning, and the planet Venus. He was considered a patron of priests and a symbol of knowledge and creativity. Quetzalcoatl was often also depicted as a cultural hero who brought agriculture, the calendar, and the arts to humanity. His teachings emphasized the importance of self-sacrifice and humility. The connections here are so obvious that ancient Mesoamerican are essentially telling us that an all-knowledgeable God came to their land, bringing all the elements of civilization. And this matches perfectly the historical records that we see, and all the evidence that we see, that in 1500 BC, a people came to the land with their technology of agriculture, writing, mathematics, life-saving medicine, building techniques, engineering, and so much more. For all intent and purposes, these people were gods to the Mesoamericans, and they recorded them as such. And like any gods, centuries later, they morphed into a legend. Oh, and by the way, if you were wondering what the people who built Göbekli Tepe looked like, well, here it is. Flat nose, high cheekbones, strong African features. And this matches what we already know of the Natufians who invented agriculture, and who we have shown are clearly black Africans in previous videos. The Natufians are said to have built Göbekli Tepe too. And so, the Mesoamericans recorded these African gods with their many features in their art, down to the dreadlock hairstyles and West African head coverings. That's right, you heard it right. Many of the Olmec heads had dreadlocks, a hairstyle only worn by black Africans and not by the Polynesians. But it's not just the hair, it's also the helmets.
And the kind of flattened base, the brow ridge. And look at the helmet. That's a very peculiar type of helmet. It does not occur anywhere else in America. It has a strap along along the face, falling along the ear, and it has a circular ear plug. Those helmets, exact type of helmet, were found in the Egyptian world in this period. What period? The period that has been dated by carbon-14 datings.
Okay then, if black Africans were so influential in Mesoamerica, and if they came in such numbers and in so many waves, then there should at least have been a remnant of them when the Europeans arrived in 1498, and the earliest European would have reported them in their earliest voyages. Well, they did. In his journal, Christopher Columbus noted that the indigenous people of Hispaniola reported visits from black-skinned people who arrived from the south and southeast, bearing spears made of a metal called guanin, an alloy of gold, silver, and copper. And as you know, not only is guanin the same name used by multiple West African nations for gold, but when these spears were tested, they had the exact same composition as the spears made in Africa. I wonder how historians explain this one. Oh, right, they don't. Because even though it is in the Journal of Columbus himself, this is never explained or mentioned. Because it would mean that we would all have to admit that black Africans were navigating to the New World well before Columbus. But their presence is also seen in Balboa's encounter. In 1513, Spanish explorer Vasco Núñez de Balboa reported encountering African men in Panama. These individuals were said to be captives of a local chief, leading to further speculation about African presence in the Americas prior to European arrival. And where there are captives, there is a war. Where there is a war, there is a nation. From this seeding, civilization started to spread throughout the Americas at a frantic rate. LiDAR imagery has shown that all over Central and South America, complex civilizations propping up all over. Megastructures indicative of very large population centers, very well organized, are being found. All of them, now lost to the jungle after disease from the European invaders, wiped out a whole continent, causing collapse after collapse. Really, a great loss to humanity. A humanity that has not recovered from being an intentional destruction of historical artifacts, pointing to a truth that would be too inconvenient for the powers that be. And so, the cover-up continues where evidence is now painted as similarities and coincidences. Where famous pyramids suddenly appear in Mesoamerica in the same time frame when the Africans from the Nubio-Kemetic civilization complex are shown to be present.
Is that the same place and the same time these heads and skeletons and clay portraits appear with Africoid-type hair and features and helmets, you have things suddenly occurring in the American world that do not occur before. The first pyramid is built in America in that period. It appears on the very same religious platform where the Africoid heads are found. For the first time, the Americans are making these huge statues when before they were making small things largely out of clay. For the first time, they're working in monumental stone.
Also, the first time in their history, the Americans are suddenly moving massive blocks of stones downriver and working them to an uncanny precision. No one in history had mastered this, except the African, in the Nubio-Kemetic civilization. And yet it appears overnight, in Mesoamerica, at the same time that black African skeletal remains, and black African pottery, and black African writing methodology happen to all emerge simultaneously in Olmec country. And in that same time period, the Mesoamerican starts to practice skull deformation, a practice from Kemet at the time, as you can see from the depiction of the son of Pharaoh Amenephis IV. In that same time period, the Mesoamericans start to incorporate the corbelled vault arches in their architecture. On the right, you can see the picture of a corbelled vault arch from the Red Pyramid near Giza. In the Aztec Codex, one can find a very particular smiting pose depicting a warrior grasping the hair of a submissive captive. On the right, the Narmer palette depicts a pharaoh smiting the enemy. See for yourself. In the Codex Borgia, from south-central Mexico, we can see an initiation scene with baptism by water. On the right, an ancient Egyptian scene from the Temple of Esna, depicting an initiation through baptism by water. The twin serpent motifs, showing up in Aztec and ancient Egyptian iconography. I am sure this is all a coincidence too. The Mayan half-jaguar and the Egyptian sphinx, both of them sporting the same paws. The sacred Tau cross found in both Mesoamerica and ancient Egypt. To attribute all these cultural similarities to chance is to be wholly dishonest of the truth, especially in the face of genetic, skeletal, archaeological, religious, writing, and mathematic evidence. Oh, and the Tau cross also shows up in Göbekli Tepe. And the similarities go on and on and on, all of them pointing to the same origin, the Black Africans from the Nubio-Kemetic civilization as the initial wave of civilization influence in Mesoamerica, and the multiple subsequent waves from the same stock, but this time from West Africa. I would like to leave you with this last quote from the great teacher himself on the opposition one faces in his life when trying to expose the truth. Quote, "Well, fighting for a new vision of man, a new vision of history, is worth it, painful though it may be. The warrior's courage does not protect him from the wound of bullets. But I have found over time, David, that the negatives have been my greatest help. That is the one lesson I have learned over the years. The negative is very important. Oftentimes, it is more important than the positive. Sometimes, if something is highly successful and meets no great opposition, it can make you facile. If it meets with great negatives, it can be even better in the end." Without History cannot exist without the support of many of you, from sharing the video to your Patreon and YouTube memberships. These help me continue to bring our truth, the missing piece in the history of man. Join us and see how those who are said to be without history birthed civilization itself.
Wave water. They went in two directions. They went out to what is now known as Oceania and became a people known as the Negritos, and they also went towards Mexico and impacted this Olmec civilization. The reason why we now know that is because there was a genetic trace done. You know about DNA now. That's getting a lot of play in the paper. DNA means you can trace the genetic code of a people. The genetic code of the, and there are still native blacks in Mexico. That's never been explained by archaeologists before Columbus arrived. DNA tests done on them. DNA tests done on the bones of some of the Olmec people, not all of them, the ancient remains, show a definite genetic trace, not to Africa only, but across the Pacific. When they found